In 1984, Hollywood wasn't just making movies about the future, it was accidentally writing a blueprint for it. Surveillance states, corporate overlords, genetic manipulation, AI rebellion, and crumbling democracies, all buried in VHS tapes most people forgot existed. So here's the question. How many of these 15 forgotten 80s dystopian films actually came true? Number 15, Miracle Mile, 1988. This one starts as a quirky love story and then drops you into a nuclear nightmare with zero warning. Anthony Edwards plays a musician who accidentally intercepts a phone call at a diner payphone. The voice on the other end is a panicked soldier who says nuclear missiles are already in the air, and there are roughly 70 minutes before Los Angeles is wiped off the map. From that single phone call, the entire film spirals into one of the most realistic depictions of mass hysteria ever captured on screen. What makes Miracle Mile so hauntingly prophetic is how it nails the speed of panic in the information age. One unverified piece of catastrophic news spreads through a diner, then a neighborhood, then a city, and suddenly rational people are doing irrational things. Sound familiar? In January 2018, Hawaii received a false missile alert, and for 38 minutes, the entire state descended into the exact kind of chaos this film depicted 3 decades earlier. People were shoving children into storm drains. Traffic jammed every highway. Families sent goodbye messages to each other. Director Steve DeJarnat spent years trying to get this film made because every studio wanted a happy ending and he refused. The result is a gut punch of a movie that refuses to comfort you. Critics at the time dismissed it as too bleak, but modern audiences have called it one of the most underrated thrillers of the decade. The Tangerine Dream soundtrack adds this eerie, dreamlike quality that makes every second feel like borrowed time. If you want a film that predicted our age of misinformation-driven panic, this is ground zero. Number 14, Defcon 4, 1985. 3 astronauts orbiting Earth and a military satellite watch helplessly as nuclear war erupts below them. When they finally crash land back on the surface, the world they return to isn't a barren wasteland. It's a brutal feudal society where a teenage warlord has already seized control using intimidation, propaganda, and hoarded resources. Defcon 4 predicted something most apocalypse films got wrong. The real threat after a collapse isn't radiation or starvation. It's the speed at which authoritarian power structures fill every vacuum. This low-budget Canadian production was largely ignored during its theatrical run, but it has quietly built a cult following because of how disturbingly accurate its social commentary feels today. The teenage dictator in the film controls people by controlling information and supplies, rewarding loyalty and brutally punishing dissent. He doesn't need advanced weapons, he just needs fear and scarcity. Critics in 1985 called it cheap and derivative, but revisiting it now feels like watching a documentary about how strong men rise in unstable regions around the world. The film also predicted how quickly civilized people abandon their morality when survival is on the line. The astronauts, who represent the educated elite, are completely unprepared for a world that doesn't respect credentials or rank. Director Paul Donovan made this on a shoestring budget in Nova Scotia, and the rough, grimy production design actually works in the film's favor. It doesn't look like a Hollywood apocalypse. It looks like something that could actually happen in a rural community after a collapse. That realism is exactly what makes it so unsettling decades later. Number 13, The Quiet Earth, 1985. A New Zealand scientist named Zach wakes up one morning and discovers he is the last person on Earth. No bodies, no destruction, just silence. Everyone has simply vanished. What follows is one of the most psychologically devastating explorations of isolation ever filmed, and it came out 35 years before the world collectively experienced lockdowns and the crushing weight of being alone. Bruno Lawrence delivers a performance that starts with confusion, shifts into manic freedom, and then collapses into total psychological unraveling. There is a scene where he dresses in a woman's slip and addresses a cardboard cutout audience from the balcony of a mansion, declaring himself president of the Quiet Earth. It is simultaneously hilarious and heartbreaking, and it captures something deeply true about what happens to the human mind without community. Director Jeff Murphy adapted this from Craig Harrison's novel, and the film's brilliance lies in what it doesn't explain. The event, as the characters call it, was caused by a secret energy experiment that went wrong, but the film never fully details the science. It trusts the audience to sit with the mystery. Critics praised it as one of the finest science fiction films to come out of the Southern Hemisphere, and its final shot remains one of the most debated images in genre cinema. The film predicted our growing anxiety about unchecked scientific experimentation and the arrogance of playing God with forces we don't fully understand. It also nailed the psychological toll of extreme isolation with frightening precision. Anyone who lived through 2020 will recognize themselves in Zach's slow unraveling. Number 12, Born in Flames, 1983. Director Lizzie Borden spent 5 years making this film on a budget of roughly $40,000, and the result is one of the most radical pieces of speculative fiction to come out of the 1980s. Set in a version of America 10 years after a peaceful socialist revolution, Born in Flames asks a devastating question. What if even a progressive utopia still oppressed women and minorities? The answer, according to this film, is that real change requires burning the old structures down entirely. Shot in a raw, documentary style that makes it feel like intercepted news footage, the film follows 2 pirate radio stations run by women of different races and ideologies who eventually realize they need to unite against a system that pretends to be fair while keeping them marginalized. It predicted the rise of grassroots media, the fracturing of progressive movements along racial lines, and the way governments co-opt the language of equality without delivering actual justice. When it premiered, even left-wing critics didn't know what to do with it. It was too radical for mainstream feminism and too feminist for mainstream radicals. But over the decades, its reputation has only grown. Scholars now consider it a foundational text in intersectional political cinema. The film's depiction of women using unlicensed radio broadcasts to organize resistance eerily mirrors how social media and podcasts became tools of political mobilization decades later. Borden essentially predicted the entire architecture of modern digital activism using 2 fictional radio DJs in a crumbling New York City apartment. The fact that a $40,000 film from 1983 saw the future more clearly than billion-dollar think tanks is either inspiring or terrifying. Number 11, Split Second, 1992. Wait, this one squeaks in just past the 80s cutoff, and some purists will argue about it, but Split Second was conceived, developed, and rooted entirely in 80s dystopian thinking, so it earns its place. Set in a flooded, rain-drenched London in the year 2008, this film imagined a future where climate change had submerged most of the city and cops patrolled the waterlogged streets hunting a mysterious creature that was ripping out human hearts. Rutger Hauer stars as a caffeine-addicted, chocolate-obsessed detective who is half burned out and half unhinged, chasing a killer that might not even be human. The film predicted London flooding with eerie accuracy. In 2007, just 1 year before the film's fictional setting, the United Kingdom experienced catastrophic summer floods that submerged entire communities and caused billions in damage. Climate scientists had been warning about it for years, but Split Second visualized it for mainstream audiences long before anyone was paying attention. The production design is phenomenal for its budget, creating a perpetually dark, waterlogged cityscape that feels oppressive and claustrophobic. Critics dismissed it as a B-movie creature feature, but rewatching it now, the environmental anxiety running underneath the monster plot feels uncomfortably prescient. Hauer clearly had a blast making it, bringing the same intensity he brought to Blade Runner, but with a darkly comic edge. His detective doesn't fight the apocalypse. He just tries to survive it with a big gun and a bad attitude. It's a film that understood climate catastrophe wouldn't look like a dramatic Hollywood disaster. It would look mundane, exhausting, and wet. Number 10, Kamikaze. 1989-1982, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, one of the most important directors in cinema history, made this his final film before his death at age 37. He also stars in it, wearing a leopard print suit and looking like a man who already knows the world is a joke. Set in a near-future Germany controlled by a single megacorporation called the Combine, the film follows a detective investigating a bomb threat at the corporation's headquarters. What he uncovers is far more disturbing than any bomb. The Combine doesn't just control the economy, It controls culture, entertainment, and truth itself. Fassbinder essentially predicted the rise of media conglomerates that would dominate information, entertainment, and public opinion simultaneously. The film imagines a world where a corporation decides what people watch, read, think, and believe, and anyone who threatens that monopoly is quietly eliminated. Sound like any 5 or 6 companies you can think of right now? The visual style is deliberately garish, all neon and synthetic surfaces, creating a world that looks luxurious on the surface but rots underneath. German critics were divided when it premiered, some calling it Fassbinder's weakest work, and others recognizing it as a bitter final statement from an artist who saw through every illusion. The film flopped commercially and virtually disappeared from public consciousness, but media scholars have resurrected it in recent years as a startlingly accurate prediction of corporate media consolidation. Fassbinder died just weeks after production wrapped, making this film feel like a warning delivered from beyond the grave. Number 9. The Handmaid's Tale, 1990. Before the massively successful Hulu series, there was this deeply unsettling film adaptation directed by Volker Schlöndorff with a screenplay by none other than Harold Pinter. Natasha Richardson stars as Kate, a woman living in the Republic of Gilead, a theocratic military dictatorship that has replaced the United States government after a stage crisis. Women have been stripped of all rights and divided into classes based on their usefulness to the regime. The film was released to mixed reviews, with many critics complaining it was too cold and clinical compared to Margaret Atwood's furiously passionate novel. But that clinical detachment is exactly what makes it prophetic. It doesn't present Gilead as a screaming nightmare. It presents it as bureaucratic, organized, and terrifyingly efficient, which is exactly how real authoritarian systems operate. They don't announce themselves with dramatic speeches. They creep in through legislation, surveillance, and the slow erosion of rights people assumed were permanent. Richardson gives a quietly devastating performance, capturing the internal numbness of someone whose entire identity has been erased by the state. Robert Duvall plays the commander with a chilling everyman quality that makes the horror feel domestic rather than theatrical. Faye Dunaway, as Serena Joy, delivers a portrait of complicity that still stings. The film predicted the modern resurgence of debates around reproductive rights with such accuracy that when the Hulu series premiered decades later, audiences were stunned by how relevant the material had become. Schlöndorff's version deserves rediscovery not as a lesser adaptation, but as its own disturbing prophecy wrapped in restraint. Number 8. Hardware, 1990. Director Richard Stanley made this ferocious debut film about a combat robot reassembling itself inside a woman's apartment, and it predicted the terrifying trajectory of autonomous weapons with shocking clarity. Set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland where the government is secretly implementing population control through sterilization, Hardware follows a soldier who brings home a robot skull from the desert as a gift for his sculptor girlfriend. The skull belongs to a Mark 13, a military android designed to kill, and it begins rebuilding itself from scrap metal in her studio. What starts as a contained horror thriller quickly becomes a meditation on how military technology, once created, cannot be controlled. The Mark 13 was designed for a specific purpose, but it doesn't care about purpose. It only cares about function. That concept, machines pursuing their programmed objectives regardless of human intent, is the exact fear that now surrounds autonomous drone warfare and AI weapon systems. Stanley shot the film on a minuscule budget, but wrung maximum visual impact from every frame, using the claustrophobic apartment setting to create unbearable tension. The color palette is drenched in reds and oranges, giving the entire film the look of something viewed through a thermal scope. Iggy Pop shows up as a voice on a radio broadcast, and Lemmy from Motorhead has a cameo. Critics were divided, but audiences who saw it became devoted evangelists. The film's central warning that building machines to kill will always end with those machines killing the wrong people has only grown more urgent as military A development accelerates worldwide. Number 7. Cherry 2000, 1987. In the year 2017, the American economy has collapsed, water is scarce, and romantic relationships have been replaced by legal contracts negotiated by lawyers before any intimacy can occur. When a man's perfect android companion malfunctions, he hires a tough female tracker to guide him through the lawless wastelands to find a replacement. Cherry 2000 was dismissed as a silly B-movie when it went straight to video, but take a closer look at what it actually predicted. Human relationships mediated by legal agreements and technology. Sound like dating apps and consent contracts? The film imagined a world where genuine human connection became so complicated, so litigious, and so fraught with risk that people simply gave up and turned to artificial companions instead. Decades later, the companion robot industry is a multi-billion-dollar market, and loneliness has been declared a public health epidemic. Melanie Griffith plays the tracker, delivering a performance full of grit and charisma that deserved a better received film around it. The wasteland sequences are genuinely thrilling, and director Steve DeJarnat, yes, the same Steve DeJarnat who made Miracle Mile, fills every frame with inventive world-building on a tight budget. The villains are a hippie cult living in a Las Vegas casino, which is both absurd and weirdly predictive of how countercultures can become authoritarian. Critics hated it. Audiences ignored it. But Cherry 2000 might be the most accidentally prophetic film about modern loneliness and the commodification of love that the decade produced. It saw us replacing human connection with technology, and it was exactly right. Number 6, Circuitry Man, 1990. In a future where pollution has forced humanity underground, a woman must transport a case of black market computer chips containing synthetic emotions across a dangerous landscape of criminals and rogue androids. Circuitry Man sounds like pure pulp, and it is, but buried inside its B-movie framework is a prediction that hits like a freight train today. The idea of synthetic emotions stored on chips and sold on the black market is essentially the precursor to the modern pharmaceutical mood alteration industry, microdosing culture, and the entire concept of emotional experience as a product to be purchased. Director Stephen Lovey built an entire underground civilization on what must have been pocket change, and the result has a grimy, lived-in quality that bigger-budget films often lack. Vernon Wells, who played the terrifying villain in Commando, stars as Plughead, a villainous android who literally plugs into people's minds. Dana Wheeler-Nicholson brings warmth and intelligence to a role that could have been one-dimensional. The film also predicted the concept of emotional data as currency, something that social media companies now exploit daily. Every time an algorithm serves you content designed to trigger a specific emotional response, it is essentially doing what the chip dealers in Circuitry Man do. The film imagines emotions stripped from their human context and sold as consumable experiences, which is disturbingly close to how platforms monetize outrage, joy, fear, and nostalgia today. It went almost completely unnoticed upon release and remains virtually unknown, which is a shame because its central metaphor only grows sharper with every passing year. Number 5. The Running Man, 1987. Arnold Schwarzenegger stars in this adaptation of a Stephen King novel written under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, and while most people remember it as a cheesy action film, its predictions about reality television are almost supernaturally accurate. In a totalitarian 2019 America, the most popular television show is a gladiatorial game where convicted criminals fight for their lives against them professional killers while the audience votes and cheers from home. The Running Man predicted Survivor, American Gladiators, and the entire structure of elimination-based reality entertainment nearly a decade before any of it existed, but it went even further. It predicted deepfake technology. In the film, the government fabricates video evidence to frame Arnold's character for a massacre he tried to prevent. They alter footage, manufacture false narratives, and broadcast them as truth to a public too entertained to question anything. That concept was pure science fiction in 1987. Now it's a daily headline. Richard Dawson, the legendary Family Feud host, plays the game show villain Damon Killian with such slimy perfection that you forget he's acting. He understood television manipulation better than anyone on set because he had lived inside that machine for decades. Director Paul Michael Glaser created a neon-soaked dystopia that looks ridiculous on the surface but cuts deep underneath. Critics savaged it, calling it mindless, but the film's thesis, that entertainment would become the primary tool of political control, aged like prophecy. Every time you watch people's lives destroyed for ratings on a reality show, you are living inside this film. Number 4, Videodrome, 1983. David Cronenberg created something with Videodrome that transcends film and enters the realm of philosophical warning. James Woods plays Max Wren, a sleazy cable TV programmer who discovers a pirate broadcast showing real torture and violence. As he becomes obsessed with the signal, his body begins to physically merge with technology, growing a cavity in his abdomen that accepts videotapes. Long live the new flesh. Cronenberg predicted that media consumption would become a biological process, that screens would literally rewire our brains and bodies. In 1983, that sounded like horror fantasy. Now, neuroscientists publish papers about how smartphone use physically alters brain structure, how social media triggers the same dopamine pathways as addictive substances, and how screen addiction has measurable physiological effects. The line between the viewer and the viewed has dissolved exactly as Cronenberg warned. Deborah Harry of Blondie plays Nikki Brand, a character who becomes so enmeshed with the broadcast signal that she essentially lives inside the screen. That image, a person existing more fully in media than in reality, describes millions of people today. The film was controversial upon release, with critics divided between those who recognized its genius and those who were simply repulsed. It flopped at the box office, earning barely $6 million against its budget, but its influence has become immeasurable. Every conversation about media, addiction, screen time, digital identity, and the physical toll of constant connectivity leads back to this film. Cronenberg didn't just predict the future, he diagnosed a disease before the first symptom appeared. There's number 3, RoboCop, 1987. Paul Verhoeven's masterpiece disguised itself as a loud, violent action film, and most audiences in 1987 took it at face value. But RoboCop is one of the most surgically precise satires of corporate America ever made, and its predictions have come true with disturbing specificity. In a near-future Detroit, the city government has been privatized by a mega-corporation called Omni Consumer Products. Public services exist only to generate profit. The police force is understaffed and underfunded because OCP wants it to fail, so they can justify replacing human officers with machines. A murdered cop is resurrected as a cyborg weapon, and the film asks whether a corporation can own a person's body, memories, and identity. Detroit actually did go bankrupt in 2013. Private corporations have increasingly taken over public services across America. Police militarization has escalated exactly as the film depicted, and the concept of a company owning the augmented body of a worker isn't science fiction anymore when you read about employees with company-mandated microchip implants. The fake commercials scattered throughout the film predicted the absurdity of modern advertising with pinpoint accuracy. A board game about nuclear war, a gas-guzzling car called the SUX 6000. Verhoeven understood that American capitalism would consume everything, including its own citizens. Peter Weller's performance under pounds of prosthetics remains one of the most emotionally resonant in action cinema. The scene where RoboCop visits his former home and fragments of memory surface through corporate programming is genuinely heartbreaking. Critics praised it, audiences loved it, and it earned over $50 million worldwide. But very few people in 1987 realized they were watching a prophecy. Number 2, They Live, 1988. John Carpenter made this film for $3 million and accidentally created the most important political allegory of the decade. Roddy Piper plays a drifter who discovers a pair of sunglasses that reveal the true world beneath the surface. Billboards that read "Vacation" actually say "Obey." Advertisements for computers actually say "Consume." And the ruling class are literally aliens wearing human faces, controlling humanity through subliminal messaging embedded in every piece of media. They Live predicted the age of manufactured consent, algorithmic manipulation, and the invisible architecture of consumer control with a bluntness that still shocks. The famous 6-minute fight scene over a pair of sunglasses is really about how hard it is to force someone to see a truth they don't want to see. Carpenter has said in interviews that the film is about unrestrained capitalism and the way the working class is kept asleep through consumption and media saturation. He wasn't being subtle, and he didn't need to be. The film was a modest hit, earning $26 million at the box office, but its cultural afterlife has been enormous. The Obey image from the film became the basis for Shepard Fairey's entire artistic career and one of the most recognizable pieces of street art in history. Critics in 1988 called it heavy-handed. Critics in 2025 call it a documentary. Piper, a professional wrestler with no formal acting training, delivers a performance of such working-class authenticity that it grounds every fantastical element. Carpenter proved that you don't need a massive budget to tell the truth. You just need a pair of sunglasses and the guts to put them on. Number 1, Brazil, 1985. Terry Gilliam's Brazil is not just the greatest forgotten dystopian film of the 1980s. It might be the single most prophetic film about modern bureaucratic life ever made. Set in a retro-futuristic world where paperwork has replaced purpose and the government wages an endless war against an unseen enemy called terrorism, the film follows Sam Lowry, a low-level bureaucrat who dreams of flying free but is trapped inside a system so absurd that a typo on a government document leads to an innocent man being arrested, tortured, and killed. Nobody in the system is evil. They are just following procedure. That single concept predicted more about the 21st century than any other film on this list. The war on terror, bureaucratic dehumanization, surveillance culture, the impossibility of correcting government errors, the way ordinary people become complicit in atrocity by simply doing their jobs. Gilliam fought Universal Studios for months to protect his cut of the film, with the studio demanding a happy ending and Gilliam refusing to compromise. The battle became legendary in Hollywood, and Gilliam eventually won, preserving one of the bleakest and most important endings in cinema. Robert De Niro appears in a small but devastating role as a rogue heating engineer who has become a fugitive simply for doing his job without filing the proper paperwork. Jonathan Pryce gives a career best performance as Lowry, a man whose only escape from a suffocating system is fantasy. The film earned modest returns and divided critics upon release, but time has been extraordinarily kind to it. Every frustrating interaction with automated customer service, every Kafkaesque government process, every form filled out in triplicate that disappears into a void, all of it was captured in this film 40 years ago. Gilliam didn't just predict the future, he built it on a soundstage and dared us to laugh. So there it is, 15 films the world forgot that somehow saw everything coming. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these predictions disturbed you the most? Which film are you watching tonight? Drop your answers in the comments. And here's the real question that should keep you up tonight. If low-budget filmmakers in the 1980s could see the future this clearly, what does it say about us that we watched their warnings and did absolutely nothing?